Hi, this is Helen Kelly with DMA, and today we are going to be training on the written standards for the Western PA CoC, specifically as related to transitional housing and the transitional housing rapid rehousing joint component. Now, before we dive into the training, we just wanted to explain what the written standards actually are. They are required by HUD, and they provide guidance for CoC and ESG programs related to service delivery. And they can really be a guide for you, whether you need a refresher or your organization has turnover. You can go to the written standards and or these trainings on the written standards and really get an understanding for how programs should operate and be implemented within the CoC. Because by having written standards, the CoC is ensuring that all programs are operating in a generally consistent, coordinated way that's compliant with HUD and CoC standards. We're also going to take a minute to explain how the written standards are structured. And if you haven't had an opportunity to watch the larger training on the general standards for all program types, you will definitely need to do that. So you can either pause and go watch that training, or please be sure to watch it shortly after watching this one. Also, if you are operating a THRRH project, you're going to want to go back and watch the training that's specific to rapid rehousing as well, because this training is going to be looking at the transition housing project type by itself and then how it pertains to THRRH. Now, I mentioned that the written standards themselves are written for all project types first, and that includes record keeping and case management standards. The case management standards section is new to this rendition of your written standards. Standards then follow that section by each project type. So, for example, permanent supportive housing, homeless prevention, rapid rehousing, supportive services, street outreach, emergency shelter. All of those different project types then have their own sections. There is a set of appendices as well, and they are supplemental resources referenced throughout the standard. So for example, the HUD definition of homelessness chart, that is an appendix. Now, finally, we have a companion piece to the written standards, and those are templates. They are a completely separate document, and although their use isn't required, they are available to you as a resource. And although the specific template might not be required, many times, not all, but many times, the content on those templates is required. So, for example, a self-declaration of housing status, and what does that look like? A lease needs to have certain key pieces of information, especially if it's for ESG. So the content could still be useful for you, even if you have your own sets of templates already. So you can go to them if you have never had templates before and you just want to borrow from those. That's absolutely fine. If you would like to reconcile what you have with what's there, then that also is a great idea, although not required. And then lastly, if you are operating a regional project in the CoC and you would prefer to have a streamlined kind of reporting and documentation process across all of your subrecipients, then you might want to look to some of those templates as well. Okay, so now that all of that background information is out of the way, we are going to get into the content as related to transitional housing. And then, as I mentioned, after that piece, we'll be talking about THRRH specifically. Now, when it comes to accessing transitional housing, all referrals have to come through the coordinated entry system. Projects must follow the CoC order of prioritization when filling vacancies, and we'll get to that in just a minute. And your transitional housing project should be as low barrier as possible while still honoring eligibility and prioritization criteria. Now, in terms of eligibility, what we're looking at is literally homeless, or category 1, or fleeing and attempting to flee domestic violence, or category 4. So that is for the CoC funded TH. Now, if there is a non-HUD funded program, they are free to serve categories 1, 2, 3, or 4. That's at their discretion. Transitional housing should be used for households with barriers to maintaining or retaining housing. So people whose primary need is affordable housing, they should not be prioritized for transitional housing, as TH provides more intensive supports. Now, one other point that we want to mention regarding chronic status is that a household enrolled in TH loses their chronic homelessness status. There is a caveat to that. The only exception is a household that is unsheltered and eligible for PSH. They may be provided a bed in a TH facility for up to 7 days if emergency shelter and hotel vouchers are unavailable. During these 7 days, they are not enrolled in the actual transitional housing project, and they do not lose their chronic status. There is more on this in the written standards themselves. So since the CoC has insufficient funds to meet all of the needs of those who kind of encapsulate the entire universe of eligible households, there needs to be a prioritization process. As I just mentioned, those with some more severe needs, they should be the ones prioritized for transitional housing. So as it's stated in the written standards, TH should be targeted to people who face more severe challenges to finding housing. This model is generally targeted toward people with substance use disorders, survivors of domestic violence, and transition age youth. Keeping this in mind, the top priority when you're thinking about those populations I just mentioned, the top priority are those who are chronically homeless, and currently they're category 1, with the highest VI SPDAT score, working your way down by score. You start with the unsheltered, and then you proceed the same way, moving to the sheltered. The next level of priority would be the non-chronic households that are literally homeless, or category 1, and the highest VI SPDAT score as well. Starting with unsheltered, but then moving toward the sheltered homeless. The full order of prioritization can be found in the standards. And one final note on this, with the exception of that 7-day caveat that I mentioned regarding chronic homeless status and shelter beds and TH, since TH residents who are chronically homeless prior to entering TH are generally no longer considered chronically homeless upon entering TH, the TH provider and Coordinated Entry Assessment Center should assist the households in making an informed decision about the best housing option that's right for them. There's a special note on emergency transfers to DB, and if an emergency transfer is needed for this reason, the provider should offer an alternate unit within their organization's own inventory whenever possible. However, if a unit is unavailable, the provider should follow the process outlined in the emergency transfer plan, which is also referenced and hyperlinked in the written standards themselves. Emergency transfer requests may be expedited and prioritized in order to identify a housing resource for which the participant or household is eligible as soon as possible. And although projects should consider a household's county of preference for chronically homeless households, Before moving on to the non-chronic households, which is what we saw to do in the order of prioritization, TH projects should really identify other chronically homeless households residing anywhere else in the CoC and offer their transitional housing bed to them first, allowing the person to move into the region if they so choose. Now, the documentation that's specific to transitional housing is the executed occupancy agreement in the case of leasing projects. If you have a joint component, you will have additional documentation needs, but those will have been explored in the rapid rehousing portion of the training, which is a separate module, as I had mentioned. In terms of duration and amounts, transitional housing should be used as temporary or bridge housing, not to exceed 12 months, and the average target stay should be 9 months or less. That said, the stay really should not be any longer than what is needed for that particular house to stabilize or obtain other housing. Longer-term transitional housing in excess of 6 or 12 months should be targeted to people who face the most severe challenges to finding housing. And while up to 24 months is technically eligible, transitional housing, as I mentioned, is really intended to be just bridge or temporary housing. Extensions past the 12 months may be granted only in extenuating circumstances, and each organization is tasked with coming up with their own extension approval process. So that was the general gist of how long someone can stay in the program, but in terms of specific amounts of assistance that they can receive. For TH projects using rental assistance, so this is rental assistance only, not the TH projects that use leasing dollars. But for TH projects that use rental assistance, rent contributions are mandatory. Rent contributions or maximum occupancy charge is the highest of the following. It can be 30% of the family's monthly adjusted income, 10% of the family's monthly gross income, or if the family is receiving payments for welfare assistance from a public agency and a part of the payments is specifically designated by the agency to meet the family's housing costs, the portion of the payments that is designated for the housing costs can be what their contribution is. In other models that use leasing dollars, so non-rental assistance projects, the occupancy charge is optional and can be lower, but not any higher than the maximum occupancy charge that we just went over on the previous slide. As I mentioned, there's a whole new case management section in the larger training that has to do with all project types. But as related to transitional housing, we just want to reiterate that exit planning should start upon project entry from day one. Transitional housing should be fairly short term, so folks should be working on their self-sufficiency and sustainability plans from the first day that they move into transitional housing. And case managers should offer to meet with participants at least bi-weekly when in TH. There are specific performance measures for transitional housing programs, but before I go into the specifics, I just wanted to paint a very high level overview as to why these are important. So every single project, wherever they fall in terms of their performance measures, that contributes to the CoC's overall score for those measures. And that score is important during the NOFA process because the more points that your CoC can get, that better situates them when compared to other CoCs with lesser points. So more points means that you're ranked more highly as a CoC, which means that you get to bring more financial resources into the CoC. So all of these smaller projects really do help to paint the picture for the entire CoC, which is directly related to the amount of funding which the CoC can receive. It's really important that to have the performance measures be as accurate as possible and potentially with the least amount of mistakes, to do data and data cleanups fairly often, and definitely before the performance measures are due for the NOVA purposes. But things to look at are to make sure annual assessments are in, because although someone's income might be included in HMIS somewhere, if it's not in the entry, annual, and or exit assessments, then that income isn't counting toward the performance measures. The first one here is exits to permanent housing. And the CoC is looking that at least 73% of households are exiting to permanent housing. One of the bigger snags, there's two of them that we usually see with this particular performance measure. And it's that folks kind of might fall by the wayside, and then an exit assessment is never completed with them, so there can't be an exit to permanent housing one way or the other. The other one is that a program may cease to exist at some point, but then never go back to officially close out everyone that needs to be closed out with appropriate permanent housing statuses attached to them. So those are two things to really look for. Also, clients increasing their income through either employment or benefits. Well, the CoC is looking to have 48% of adults increase their income. They don't necessarily have to increase it by a whole lot. It just needs to increase from time of enrollment. So again, that's where the annual assessments and the exit assessments become so important to this particular measure. And I will just say that usually the biggest snag here, because you can't necessarily control if someone increases their income or not, although perhaps through case management there can be some job searching or obtain benefits or things of that nature. But if someone is on Social Security, let's say, and they continue to stay on Social Security, what happens is many times the case manager does not go back into HMIS and adjust for the bumps. So whenever there is some kind of bump in a benefit, that should be reflected in HMIS. But again, please be sure to do that during annual assessments, because that's the exit assessments, because those are the ones that count for this. And we're looking at having an average length of stay of 12 months or less with a target goal of 9 months or less. Lastly, clients should not return to homelessness within 2 years. Now we're going to move quickly into the TH-RRH joint component. So if this does not pertain to you, you can probably fast forward to where we talk through the last 2 slides, because that's for everyone once again. And if you are operating the TH-RRH, everything we just mentioned in this presentation pertains to you. Everything in the rapid rehousing presentation pertains to you, as well as the standards for all program types, unless there's some kind of nuance within the next small handful of slides that should say otherwise. Now, it's really important that projects offer both components. A project should target and prioritize people experiencing homelessness with higher needs, which is what we just talked about in the TH portion. Now, a more lenient prioritization policy may be used if the joint TH-RRH project exists to fill an emergency placement gap in your service area. So, for example, if the household would remain unsheltered if not for enrollment into the project. As pertaining to both components, participants are able to choose what housing setting makes the most sense for them, which may include the TH portion only, the rapid rehousing portion only, or TH and RRH combined. The choice should be entirely driven by client choice and needs. If the caveat regarding lack of shelter beds does not apply to you, then the highest needs, again, equals those with multiple barriers to obtaining and retaining housing, and those who are the most vulnerable. The maximum duration of support for both components combined is 24 months per household. TH-RRH projects must be set up in HMIS as two different projects, one as a TH and one as an RRH. However, CoC funded TH-RRH joint component projects, they submit one APR for TH and one APR for rapid rehousing. So in terms of next steps, because we recognize that all programs may not be completely aligned with the written standards as they are currently written, and that you might need some time to make some adjustments. We're asking that all CoC and ESG funded programs sign off by July 1st, 2021, that their programs understand the standards and that you will implement them. And there's a form that is hyperlinked in the training. If there are standards that programs are not implementing, you must make a plan to implement those standards by September 1st, 2021. And feedback on the standards is welcome year-round. So if there's something that you think is a really great addition, that's always nice to know. But if there's something where you think it can be fine-tuned, or maybe something was left out, or if something just seems really unreasonable, please indicate that by filling out the feedback form, and those items can be taken into consideration the next time that the standards are updated. So that's it. Thank you for sticking with me until the end. If you have any questions at all, please email westerncoc@pennsylvaniacoc.org. Thanks everyone. I hope you have a great day.